Keanu Reeves steps onto the set of Voices in Debate, the audience expects another deep, introspective conversation. But James Holloway isn't here for reflection, he's here for confrontation. Known for his razor-sharp questioning and no-holds-barred approach, Holloway sees Keanu's silver cross necklace as more than just an accessory. To him, it's an opening, a belief to scrutinize, a stance to challenge. Yet, as Keanu takes his seat, something shifts. The energy in the room changes. Holloway leans in, ready to break his guest down. But by the end of this interview, it won't be Keanu searching for words. It'll be Holloway. And the world will be watching. Before we dive into this incredible moment, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love gripping stories like this, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow, we've got another one you won't want to miss. The studio buzzed with anticipation. Bright lights bathed the sleek, modern stage in shades of blue and gold, reflecting the show's polished identity. The audience murmured, eager for what was about to unfold. Voices in Debate had built a reputation as one of the sharpest, most unfiltered talk shows on air. At its core was James Holloway, a host both revered and feared, a man who thrived on pushing his guests to their limits. Standing center stage, Holloway adjusted his tie with a subtle smirk. His silver-streaked hair was immaculate, his piercing gaze locked and calculated. He wasn't here to make friends, he was here to unearth truths, whether his guests were ready or not. The show's theme music swelled through the speakers, and the audience erupted in applause. The camera zoomed in on Holloway as he stretched his arms wide in a well-rehearsed gesture. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Voices in Debate," he announced, his voice rich with confidence. "The show where we deconstruct narratives, test ideas, and uncover the truths others hesitate to speak." The crowd responded with enthusiasm. Week after week, Voices in Debate brought politicians, intellectuals, and celebrities into the hot seat. Some left unscathed. Most didn't. But tonight's guest was different. He wasn't a disgraced politician or a star caught in controversy. He was something far more compelling, an enigma. A Hollywood legend. Holloway let the suspense build before delivering the name that sent the audience into a frenzy. Our guest tonight is one of the most beloved figures in entertainment. A man admired not just for his talent, but for his humility. Yet, despite his fame, he remains a mystery. We know him, but do we really know him? Tonight, we go deeper. Ladies and gentlemen, Keanu Reeves. The applause was deafening. Some audience members even rose to their feet, a rare display of admiration for a guest on this notoriously intense show. The camera shifted to the side of the stage as a dark curtain slowly pulled back. Keanu emerged with his signature effortless stride, exuding a quiet yet commanding presence. He wore a sleek black suit, no tie, his shoulder-length hair framing his face. Under the studio lights, the silver cross hanging from his neck caught a glimmer, standing out against the dark fabric of his suit. He acknowledged the crowd with a reserved smile before settling into his chair opposite Holloway. He crossed his legs, completely at ease, unshaken by the atmosphere of confrontation that loomed in the air. "Keanu Reeves," Holloway said, leaning in, his sharp eyes steadying his guest. "It's an honor to have you here." "The pleasure is mine, James," Keanu replied, his voice calm and steady. A brief silence followed as the two men assessed each other. Holloway, always the strategist, was already mapping his next move. "You have a reputation," he began, "as one of the kindest, most private men in Hollywood. Always humble, never caught up in scandals. But honestly, Keanu, I think there's a lot more to you than people realize." Keanu gave a small, knowing smile. "I think we all have more layers than we show the world." Holloway nodded slightly, his expression sharpening. "No doubt. And that's exactly what we're here to explore." A calculated pause. Then, like a chess player setting up his first major move, Holloway's eyes flicked to the silver cross resting against Keanu's chest. He gestured toward it. "You've never been particularly outspoken about faith or religion. Yet here you are, wearing a very deliberate Christian symbol." Keanu's expression remained calm, unreadable, but his fingers instinctively brushed against the cross, a subtle, unconscious habit. The studio lights softened as the show returned from a commercial break. The audience, still buzzing with anticipation, was about to witness something unexpected. And James Holloway, for the first time in a long time, might just find himself on the other side of the interrogation. The Voices in Debate logo glowed behind the stage, casting a sharp contrast between the polished set and the tension brewing beneath the surface. James Holloway settled into his chair with a smug smile, the piercing gaze of a man who believed he was in control. This was his moment, his favorite part. The point where he peeled back his guests' defenses, stripped them down layer by layer, and forced them into uncomfortable territory. "All right, we're back," he announced smoothly, twirling a pen between his fingers, a casual display of dominance. Then, with the precision of a predator locking onto its prey, his eyes found Keanu Reeves. "Before the break, I asked you a simple question, Keanu. What does that necklace mean to you?" The studio fell into silence. Some in the audience leaned forward, eager to see how Keanu would handle the pressure. Keanu's fingers brushed against the silver cross, rolling it gently between them. His face remained unreadable, calm, measured, as if he were weighing his words with the same quiet precision he was known for. "This necklace," he glanced at it, then back at Holloway, his voice even. "It has personal meaning to me." Holloway arched a brow and let out a short scoffing laugh. "Personal," he repeated, his tone laced with mockery. "Come on, Keanu. You're a public figure. Everything you wear, everything you display, it sends a message." Keanu remained composed, but Holloway could feel the tension building beneath his guest's stillness. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping just enough to sound condescending. "Let's be real here." Holloway gestured toward the cross. "It's 2025. The world has changed, people have changed, and yet here you are." He pointed directly at the necklace, wearing an archaic symbol. The audience tensed. The provocation wasn't subtle, it was a direct challenge. Keanu's gaze stayed locked on Holloway. Steady. Unshaken. "Archaic," he repeated, his tone unreadable. Holloway smirked, twisting the knife deeper. "Yes. Archaic. Religion, faith, belief in unseen forces." He waved a dismissive hand. "I'm not a religious man, Keanu. I believe in reason, in progress. Frankly, I find it surprising that someone like you, modern, intelligent, forward-thinking, would still cling to something so outdated." He chuckled softly, shaking his head, as if Keanu were a child who hadn't yet outgrown fairy tales. "Look, I get it," he continued. "When simple-minded people without access to knowledge, hold on to faith, it makes sense. But you?" Holloway's eyes gleamed with superiority. "You've traveled the world. You've seen different cultures. I expected better." The insult was thinly veiled in intellectual arrogance. Some in the audience chuckled nervously at Holloway's audacity. Others shifted uncomfortably. Keanu, however, did not flinch. He didn't avert his gaze. He didn't shrink under the weight of Holloway's words. Instead, he looked at him with the kind of quiet, unwavering intensity that was impossible to ignore. Then, at last, he spoke. "Interesting, James." His voice was steady, carrying an undertone of quiet strength. "You talk as if faith and intelligence are mutually exclusive." Holloway snorted, shaking his head. "Oh, come on, Keanu. Let's be honest. How many wars have been fought in the name of that cross you're wearing? How many people have been persecuted, condemned, killed because of that symbol?" Keanu ran his thumb over the pendant, his expression unwavering. "Do you want to debate history, James?" He tilted his head slightly. "Or do you want to debate my necklace?" The audience reacted instantly, an audible rippling through the crowd. Holloway's eyes narrowed. He wasn't used to being called out so directly. He forced a chuckle, but his fingers tensed slightly on the armrest of his chair. Fair enough, he said, his tone sharper now. Let me make it simpler then. Are you wearing that cross as a statement? As a declaration to the world? It was a trap. If Keanu said yes, Holloway could accuse him of pushing a religious agenda. If he said no, he would seem hypocritical for displaying a symbol he didn't stand behind. But Keanu didn't take the bait. Instead, he studied Holloway for a moment, then leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. Are you wearing that expensive watch on your wrist as a statement, James? A pause. A second too long. The audience laughed. Keanu had flipped the conversation effortlessly. For the first time, Holloway's jaw tightened, just a fraction of a second, but enough for those paying attention to notice. He was no stranger to heated debates. But this was different. Keanu wasn't defensive. He wasn't flustered. He wasn't even playing the game. He was turning Holloway's own tactics against him. And the audience was starting to notice. But Holloway wasn't about to let control slip away. He leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to sound dangerous. All right, Keanu. Let's be blunt. His eyes gleamed. In a world of science, evolution, and technology, do you really believe that symbol on your chest still has a place? The provocation was no longer subtle. It was a direct challenge. The studio held its breath. Keanu's lips parted, ready to respond. And just as he was about to speak, the show's theme music played. Commercial break. Holloway grinned triumphantly, turning to the camera. We'll be right back, folks. But trust me, this conversation is far from over. The lights shifted, the tension lingered, and as the cameras cut away, the audience knew. The real moment was still to come. Together with his smug smile, James Holloway believed he had backed Keanu Reeves into a corner. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen. His voice carried the satisfaction of a man who thought he had already won. He turned to the camera, holding his audience in the palm of his hand. Before the break, we left a question in the air, one that I think we all want answered. He let the moment linger. In a world of science, technology, and evolution, does that symbol still have a place? He turned back to Keanu, eyes sharp, waiting for hesitation. Waiting for him to stumble. But Keanu Reeves did not hesitate. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, calm, steady, an almost unreadable glint in his eyes. James, if you don't mind, may I ask you a question? Holloway blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Oh, by all means, he grinned, though there was an edge of mockery in his tone. Keanu studied him for a moment before speaking. What do you believe evolution is? Holloway squinted slightly, sensing a trap. Oh, come on, Keanu. Evolution is progress. It's growth. It's about leaving behind outdated beliefs and advancing toward a world driven by reason. Keanu nodded slowly, as if considering the answer. So, to you, evolving means abandoning anything that can't be measured in a lab? Holloway chuckled dryly. Well, he spread his hands, if something can't be proven, then it's just an idea, right? Keanu held his gaze, patient, unshakable. And love? Holloway blinked. What about love? Keanu's voice remained steady. Can you measure love, James? The audience murmured. A few people crossed their arms, intrigued by the turn in conversation. Holloway scoffed, but there was a slight shift in his demeanor now. I'm not sure I follow. Keanu didn't break eye contact. Does love exist? Holloway exhaled sharply. Of course it does. But have you ever scientifically proven it? Keanu tilted his head slightly. Have you ever held love in your hands? Placed it under a microscope? Silence. For the first time, Holloway hesitated. It was only a flicker, a brief shift in his expression, but it was there. He realized where Keanu was leading him. Oh no, Holloway waved a hand, laughing without humor. You are not going to compare religion to love. I'm not comparing them, Keanu replied smoothly, eyes unwavering. I'm asking you, if something can't be scientifically proven, does that mean it has no value? The audience held their breath. Holloway blinked, momentarily thrown off course. Keanu didn't raise his voice. He didn't change his expression. But his words carried a weight that filled the studio. James, you talk about faith as if it's a chain that binds people. Keanu leaned forward slightly. But what if, for some, it's a bridge? Holloway opened his mouth to counter, but Keanu continued before he could interrupt. You brought up wars. Persecution. Yes, religion has been misused, twisted into something harmful by people in power. But that doesn't erase the fact that for millions, it has also been a refuge. A light in the darkness. His fingers brushed the cross lightly. I wear this not as a statement of superiority or control, but as a reminder. Holloway's lips pressed into a thin line. Keanu looked him in the eye. A reminder of humility. Of compassion. A reminder that the world does not revolve around me. The silence stretched. Then Keanu tilted his head slightly. What about you, James? Holloway frowned. What about me? Keanu's voice remained soft, yet the question hit with the force of a hammer. Do you believe in anything greater than yourself? The audience grew even quieter. The question landed like a punch. Holloway tensed. Just slightly. But enough for the cameras to catch it. He inhaled, composing himself. We're not here to talk about me. Keanu offered a small, knowing smile. Maybe we should be. Holloway's eyes darkened. Keanu leaned back in his chair. Because when someone reacts with such hostility toward a symbol, it usually means there's something about it that unsettles them. Holloway's jaw clenched. For the first time that night, James Holloway was on the defensive. And the audience noticed. The studio was silent. The tension thick enough to cut. James Holloway was a man who thrived on control. He was comfortable when he dictated the pace of the conversation. When he was the one leading the charge. But tonight, he knew. For the first time in a long time, he was not in control. And that infuriated him. Holloway took a slow breath, leaning back, forcing himself to appear composed. But his eyes now held a dangerous glint. He couldn't afford to lose this. All right, Keanu, Holloway forced a smile, but this time, it had undeniable venom. You've spoken eloquently about humility. About compassion. About how the cross represents freedom, not control. He leaned in, his stare piercing. But tell me this, what about all the people who have suffered under that very symbol? His voice turned sharper. What about those who were judged? Condemned? Divided in its name? He gestured to the cross. You wear that on your chest, but do you understand the weight it carries? The audience held their breath. Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't shift in his seat. Instead, he smiled faintly. You talk, he said calmly, as if the symbol itself is to blame. James Holloway narrowed his eyes. Isn't it? Keanu exhaled slowly, his fingers once again brushing over the silver cross resting against his chest. If one person uses a hammer to build a home, he said, his voice calm, deliberate, and another uses the same hammer to break windows, is it the hammer's fault? Or the person holding it? The audience murmured, visibly impressed. Holloway's expression darkened. He didn't like where this was going. That's a convenient metaphor, Keanu. He shook his head, forcing a smirk. But we're talking about reality. About history. Christianity, religion, they've been responsible for countless wars, oppression, discrimination. People have suffered in its name. He gestured toward the cross. And yet you sit here, wearing that, like it's just a decoration. Keanu didn't react. He simply tilted his head slightly, studying Holloway. Then he asked, James, do you believe in justice? Holloway frowned, caught off guard by the sudden shift. Of course I do. Keanu nodded thoughtfully. And yet, how many injustices have been committed in the name of justice? A pause. The audience stirred. Holloway blinked, his confidence faltering for just a moment. What are you getting at? Keanu's voice remained measured, steady, unwavering. People have done terrible things in the name of justice. But that doesn't mean justice itself is evil. It means people can corrupt even the purest ideals. He let that sink in before continuing. The same goes for faith. Holloway's jaw tightened. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. If people have used faith as a weapon, that's not a failure of faith. It's a failure of those people. His voice was steady, but the impact of his words struck like thunder. You blame the cross, he continued, but you ignore the hands that held it. A hush fell over the room. The audience wasn't just watching anymore, they were absorbed in the conversation. Holloway forced a laugh, but there was no humor in it. So you're saying faith is innocent? That religion bears no responsibility for the damage it's caused? Keanu shook his head. I'm saying faith is like fire. It can warm a home, or it can burn it down. He let the word settle. But fire itself is neither good nor evil. It depends on how people use it. Another pause. Holloway clenched his jaw. He could feel the tide turning against him. For the first time, he didn't have a sharp rebuttal. Keanu watched him carefully, then, in a softer tone, said, Maybe the real question isn't about what faith has done. The room was silent. Maybe the real question is, Keanu's eyes locked onto Holloway's. Why does it bother you so much? A direct hit. The audience stiffened. Holloway's expression faltered for just a second. Excuse me? Keanu didn't break eye contact. You keep attacking faith, James, he said evenly. But have you ever asked yourself why? Silence. Why does the idea of belief make you so uncomfortable? The studio was dead silent. Not the usual, expectant kind of silence. A heavy, charged stillness. One that settled thick in the air. One that settled thick on James Holloway. For a man who had built his career on control, on dominating conversations, on reducing guests to contradictions and uncertainties, this was unfamiliar ground. Keanu Reeves had flipped the script. The audience could feel it. Holloway could feel it. And he despised it. He forced a chuckle, straightened his tie, leaned back slightly, as if to create the illusion of control. You're clever, Keanu, he said, his voice even. But his fingers gripped the armrest just a little too tightly. Turning the question back on me. Nice move. He exhaled sharply. But let's not pretend this is about me. Keanu's face remained unreadable. Calm. Still composed. Isn't it, though? Holloway scoffed, shaking his head. I'm not the one sitting here wearing a religious symbol. He gestured toward the cross. I'm not the one promoting a belief system in front of millions of people. Keanu raised an eyebrow. Promoting? Holloway leaned in slightly. Call it what you want, Keanu. But when someone like you, an influential public figure, walks onto a stage wearing something like that, he pointed at the necklace. It sends a message. Whether you admit it or not, you're endorsing something. Keanu tilted his head slightly. So if someone wears a rainbow flag, are they endorsing something? The audience shifted. It was a simple question. But its weight settled over the room like a storm cloud. Holloway hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Too brief for most to notice. But Keanu noticed. Holloway quickly recovered. That's different. Keanu's gaze didn't waver. A rainbow flag represents inclusivity. Equality. Keanu nodded. And you don't think faith can? The audience leaned in. Holloway's jaw tightened. Faith has been used to exclude people, Keanu. To justify hate. You can't deny that. Keanu nodded slowly. And so have governments. His voice was steady. So have ideologies. So has science. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Nearly every belief system in history has been weaponized at some point. A beat. Yet we don't erase them entirely. Keanu's eyes locked onto Holloway's. We refine them. We learn. We grow. Another pause. So why is faith the only thing you think should be erased? The tension in the room deepened. The audience felt the shift. James Holloway was losing ground. And for the first time tonight, he knew it. He needed to take back control. Holloway leaned forward, his smile tight. His tone sharpened. All right. Let's skip the philosophy. His voice dropped slightly, controlled, calculated. And get real here. James Holloway leaned forward, his voice sharpening. So tell me, Keanu, in this modern world, with all the knowledge, all the advancements we've made, do you really believe people still need faith? Keanu didn't hesitate. Yes. A simple, firm answer. Holloway's eyes narrowed. Why? Keanu took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. Because logic alone doesn't fill the human soul. The audience stilled. Keanu continued, his voice calm yet unshakable. We live in an age of information. We can explain the stars, cure diseases, connect with anyone, anywhere, in an instant. But people are lonelier than ever. More anxious. More lost. The answers we've found don't replace the meaning we seek. Holloway leaned back slightly, his face unreadable. So you're saying faith gives people meaning? Keanu nodded. For some, yes. For me, yes. And I think that's something worth respecting, even if it's not for you. Holloway exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Respecting. That's an interesting word. He smirked slightly. Because some would argue that religion has done more harm than good. Keanu didn't argue. He acknowledged it. Some would. Holloway's eyes lit up. He sensed an opening. And what do you say to them? Keanu's gaze didn't waver. His response was quiet, measured. I'd say pain isn't exclusive to faith. The room fell into silence. Humans are flawed, James. We make mistakes. We correct things. But if we only focus on what was done wrong, we ignore what was done right. A pause. The love. The hope. The kindness. That has also come from faith. From people who live by its true meaning, not by its distortion. The studio was dead silent. For the first time, James Holloway had nothing to say. His lips pressed into a thin line. The moment stretched. The audience knew it. James Holloway was out of angles. For the first time in a long time, he had no comeback. He had lost. The weight of silence in the studio was unlike anything before. James Holloway, once the commanding force of every conversation, now sat across from Keanu Reeves, visibly outmaneuvered. For the first time in his career, he had nothing to say. And the audience felt it. A slow realization spread through the room. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a shift. Keanu remained still. Composed. His presence steady, like an anchor in the middle of a storm. Then, a sound broke through the silence. Soft at first. A single clap. Then another. And then, an eruption of applause. The audience rose to their feet. An unexpected standing ovation shook the studio. Keanu's words had resonated. His calmness, his ability to navigate through every provocation, had left them speechless. James Holloway, still seated, still reeling, glanced toward the cameras. He could see the headlines forming in real time. He had lost. And he knew it. Holloway forced a thin smile, his ego fighting to maintain some semblance of control. "Well, Keanu," he said, clearing his throat, "I have to admit, I didn't expect this conversation to go in this direction." Keanu's eyes remained calm. Understanding, but not forgiving. Conversations have a way of revealing more than we plan. James Holloway's fingers tapped against his chair. A nervous tick. "That they do." He chuckled lightly, but there was no amusement in his eyes. "I suppose this is the part where I thank you for your insights and your time." Keanu nodded. "It's been a pleasure." And the way he said it, genuine yet firm, made it clear. This wasn't a victory Keanu had sought, but it was a victory nonetheless. And the world was watching. Within minutes of the episode airing, clips from the conversation flooded social media. Keanu Reeves' name dominated the trending lists. Memes, reaction videos, threads analyzing every moment. But beyond the usual internet buzz, something felt different this time. This wasn't just another viral moment. It was a shift in perception. James Holloway sat alone in his dressing room, watching the aftermath unfold. The interview was everywhere. News outlets dissected it. Talk shows replayed clips. Commentators weighed in. Some called it the night Holloway met his match. Others labeled it the most important conversation of the year. Holloway clenched his jaw as he scrolled through Twitter. Hashtag Keanu wins. It was the top trend. Critics, celebrities, even public figures were praising Keanu's calm, unwavering responses. But the worst part? It wasn't just that Keanu had stood his ground. It was that Holloway had been exposed. His usual tactics, the sharp provocations, the calculated condescension, the relentless need to corner his guests, had failed. And everyone saw it. For the first time in his career, James Holloway was not the one controlling the conversation. And he hated it. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves left the studio without a word. No grand victory speeches. No gloating. No interviews. He simply nodded to the crew, shook a few hands, and walked away. Outside, reporters swarmed. Microphones raised. "Keanu, how do you feel about the interview? Do you think Holloway was unfair? What message were you trying to send?" Keanu didn't answer. Instead, he smiled softly, got into a car, and disappeared into the night. His silence spoke louder than any response could. Days later, Keanu finally broke his silence. A single post on social media. No long statements. No explanations. Just a simple message. We don't have to agree to respect each other. We don't have to believe the same things to walk the same path. The post exploded. It wasn't about religion. It wasn't about winning. It was about understanding. And that was why Keanu had won. Because in the end, it wasn't about the argument. It was about the conversation.